Hi guys, welcome to today's tutorial. In today's video, we are going to learn the art of doming your resin pieces. Doming. So we're going to start off by selecting a multiple cavity mold. We'll also be needing some wet wipes for cleaning or wiping off any spilled resin or anything like that. We are also going to need some mixing sticks for stirring. We're going to need some silicone caps. We're going to need some gloves, which is also very essential when working with resin. And we are going to need the resin. So this resin has been pre-mixed. I used this in a previous tutorial. And this one here is a leftover. So we're going to put on our gloves. Always remember to put on gloves whenever you are working with resin. Remember, it's a chemical and it's very harmful. If you do not take care and you ingest it, you're going to harm your own self at the end of the day. So after the gloves were put on, the next thing we did was to prep the silicone mold that we are coming to use for the project. Right. So here we are going to be using this particular cap. Each cap will be carrying a different colored pigment. So here I selected two different mica powders. This design wasn't really thought of, it was just something that came within the moment. So I also selected some white mica powder. So basically for this project we are using black mica powder, gold mica powder, and white mica powder. So here the next step was to partition the liquid into different cups. Okay, so for each cup there is going to be a different colored pigment or colorant. Next, you're going to select the mica powder you want to start with, and then after opening it, you're going to use either your mixing stick or any other item you have for picking your colorant. You're going to scoop a decent quantity of it into the cup that you're going to stir it in. There are some practices I find quite easy to do with resin art. For instance, when mixing in mica powder in the resin, I've done this over and over again, mixing it in one corner of the cup before mixing the entire thing together. So it's not really a chore at this point. So at this point, anytime I pour in some mica powder, I know I have to mix it in one corner of the cup before I mix the entire thing together. And that's all resin art is about. The more you observe some chores, or I'm not even call it a chore, the more you observe some practices, it becomes very easy for you to repeat. So after the white mica powder was mixed well into the resin, I proceeded to pour it into the mold I wanted to use them in. So one honest truth about this batch of resin is that it had actually sat for quite some time, so it became very thick. It was quite difficult to work with. So I always advise that if you're not very good with resin arts, or you're a beginner, or you are just cautious enough and you don't want to waste any chemical or any resin at all, please do not let your resin sit for some time. Good. So it was a little thick. It wasn't that it wasn't workable though. It was still workable, but it was quite difficult to work with. Okay, if it gets thick, it's not easy for it to flow into tight corners like that of the scissors shape over here. One other thing was that it was not flowing very well, so it was just spilling all over the cavities of the mold, which is not too much of a chore, or it's not too much of bad news because you can still get rid of all of that. So that's what I'm doing here with the mixing stick and then the cup. After all the quantity I could scoop up with the mixing stick was done, I used my wet wipes to just wipe or clean along the edges so as to prevent or avoid any of the spilled resin from curing around the projects we are making. That's also okay. So anything about resin art, there are not too many instructions. You can just be free about the crafts and do things that will make you comfortable. So you do realize that when it spilled over, I didn't really feel scared about it. I just rushed in, used my mixer stick, scoop up most of it, and then just went with the wet wipes to clean the edges of the shape. So always keep in mind that anytime your resin overflows from the shape you are trying to create with the mold, you have to scoop it up. You must scoop it up. So here I went along to pour a quantity of resin to move so that I can move on to the next colors. So here I poured enough for each of the colors. We've already done the white. So the ones left for us to do is the black and the gold. So I used the stick again to scoop a decent quantity of the black mica powder into the first cup. So don't think too much about the quantity you use. The more you get used to resin art, you find it's very easy to just do some things. So once that was done, with the same thoughts in mind, I just mixed it into the chemical or into the liquid by mixing it in with the on one side of the cup before mixing the entire thing together. Personally, I really do prefer mica powder whenever I'm working with resin art. It gives this very, very pale effect, which I explained earlier. So with this pale effect, it makes the job very, very beautiful. So once that was poured in, I just used some few drops to pour along the stem of the wine glass. I also did the same for the next shape that I wanted to have in black, which is the bottle of nail polish shape on the mold. So this mold here is actually a beauty series mold. The beauty series mold comprises of items that all have to do with beauty accessories or girly stuff. Okay. So once that was also poured into the cavity, the next thing on the list was the gold mica powder. So again, we are not going to scoop too much pigment or too much powder, just a little quantity that will make sense for us to do the project. And then we're going to also mix that in. So I really do love the shade of gold. You even realize from the container of the mica powder that I've used most of it. I've used a lot of it. I've used a lot of the gold pigment or the gold mica powder on previous projects. Not that I posted them here, no, on previous orders, projects, and other things. So once that was well mixed into the resin, the next step was to pour it into the mold. So this mold here, this is a lipstick shape, and then the next one is glasses or spectacles or shades. So I poured into that one as well. After pouring into the mold, I realized there were some corners of the pores that hadn't yet gotten some of the mica powder or some of the resin in them. So when I saw that, I used my pipettes to do the transferring into the mold. So whenever you're working with resin, the pipette is also a very important tool. So whenever you're working on projects that have, let's say, tight corners that your pour might not actually get the resin into, you can use your pipette. So you squeeze the bottom of the pipette and then you leave it, and it's going to draw enough quantity of the resin into it so that you can transfer it into the mold you are working with. So one may ask that how does any of what we are doing here in the video actually relate to doming? So doming is basically defined as the application of a thick layer of resin to a piece of art to create a smooth and then a curved surface. So here I want you to take note of three different points. First one is that the application has to be done on a piece of art, meaning there has to be an existing piece before you can actually dome. You don't just pour resin and say you are doming while it is not already done on an existing piece. So here in the video, we are actually making a piece that will be domed later on. Okay, so here we are doing a first layer, and then the next layer will be the doming layer. Good. The next point is that it gives a smooth surface. So whenever you dome your resin piece, it's going to give it a glossy and a smooth surface. And the last point I want you to keep note of is that it also gives a curved surface. So whenever you are doming your resin piece, the surface or the doming layer has to have a curved finish. If it doesn't look curved, I don't really think we have to call that doming. So it has to have a curved surface to be considered as a domed layer or a doming layer. So anytime you are working with resin and you want to do a doming layer, you should always make sure that first of all, if there is an existing piece. Secondly, you should make sure that the doming layer gives a smooth finish and it gives a curved finish. And that's alone, these alone are the cheat codes whenever you're working with resin. So once all the resin was poured into the different cavities, I went on to using the lighter to pop all the bubbles on the surface of the mold. So this is to avoid any bubbles underneath the project when we dome it. Okay, so always remember to use your lighter to pop the bubbles whenever you are done with your project. And also do not send it too close to the mold because it can burn it, and then the resin can also catch fire. So once the bubbles were popped, I left this to sit for about 12 hours. 12 hours would be enough for it to cure or solidify enough for us to move on to the doming process. So 12 hours later, I came back to add some glitters to the surfaces of the pieces. So for the glitters, there are two main types of glitters. We have the fine glitter and we have the chunky glitter. So the fine glitter has a more fine grit, meaning it has smaller particles as compared to the chunky glitter. And any type of glitter also comes in different colors. So this one here is the chunky glitter. You realize it's more coarse and has bigger particles. So these are not the only two glitters that I'll be working with for this project. I'll also be using some few more colors just to add a little more design before we move on to the doming stage. So to make the application of the glitter on the surfaces based on the kind of design I am trying to create, I did break a piece of mixing stick to get a pointed version or a pointed side. So I got it from a piece like this one here. Great. So here I'm working with resin which has been pre-mixed with hardener. So don't get confused and think it's just resin. I only needed a little quantity of it before I was going to add in the fine glitter. So for this one, I really wanted to have a very thick consistency. I don't want it to be too runny, else it will just be going in places where I do not want it to go. So I just poured some quantity of the fine glitter, and then the next step is to mix it into the resin. So as I said earlier, I don't want it to have a very runny consistency, and this one here is quite runny. So I went ahead to pour another quantity of the fine glitter into the cup once again. So that's what I'm doing right here. But here I think I over poured. So honestly, I always advise you scoop these pigments, glitters, what have you. You scoop them. Don't be a stubborn person like me. Always use a spoon or something to scoop it up. Good. So because it was a little too thick, I poured just a few drops of the pre-mixed resin into the cup, and then I got the perfect consistency for the effects I was trying to create. So here it is quite thick, just the way I want it to be. So it's now possible for me to move on to the designing. Yes, the designer stage. So here I'm using the stick that I broke from the mixing stick to map around the edges of this shape. To be honest, I didn't pre-think this design. I just thought maybe let me just use it here, and that's what I did. So I use it to map around the edges of the shape in the mold, just to kind of maybe give it a little design. So some of the fine glitter did try to move into places I didn't want them to be, so I used the stick to just wipe them off. And next, I poured the rest of the glitter into the lipstick shape, not to cover the entire piece, but just to cover enough to give it a unique design. I also did some kind of drip effect with the glitter, just to also give it another kind of flair. So with the drip effect, I initially did a little drop on one side and then just drew a line to meet the main piece or the main design. So just to make it look more realistic, I didn't do them to look like they are on the same line. I just did them on different lines or different lengths so that it looks more natural. So for the drip effects, you just do a drop at the bottom and then you trace it to meet the main design at the top. So once I finished with the lipstick design, I moved on to the hair dryer. So I did the same for the hair dryer, just enough quantity to kind of create a design or to make it look more unique in a way. Yes. So I did use the same stick to map out where I wanted the glitter to stay, and that made it very easy for me to put them together or to form the piece I was trying to form. So after I was done with the silver color, I used my wet wipes to clean the stick so I could proceed and work on the second design. So for the second one, I'm going to be using the blue chunky glitter, and I'm going to pour a decent quantity into my distributing cup before I'm going to add in the chunky glitter. So again, I prayed quite stubborn and I did pour again from the container directly without the use of something else to do the scooping. But I think I did get the quantity I needed. Don't be stubborn like me, please. So once that was poured in, I mixed that in with the liquid, with the resin, so that it's going to also have this thick consistency that I am looking out for. So once that's done, you see, when it's very thick, it's much easier for you to direct it, for you to tell it where to go. When it's thick, you are in command, okay? That's why I always vouch for a thick consistency whenever I'm working with this kind of piece. So once it's thick enough, wherever you push it to go, it's going to stay there. However, if it's too runny, it's going to just be moving in directions you do not want to see them in. Okay, so always vouch for a thick consistency of glitter whenever you are working on a project like this one. So I also use the fine glitter in this project to also add a little bit of I don't know, but it was sitting there, so I wanted to add it. That's the truth. So there was still more glitter left, and I didn't want that to go waste. So I just used that same glitter to map the bottom of the cup. Sorry, not the cup, the bottom of the design, to also add a little more make it more realistic, I guess. So that's also very much possible. So with this, I don't want you to learn this tutorial and recreate the same thing. I want you to learn this tutorial and then you just use this tutorial as a stepping point in making your own unique design. Okay. So once I was done with the lip gloss shape, I know it's the nail polish. Once I was done with the nail polish shape, I poured some fine purple glitter into the distributing cup again to work on the next cute project. You should always bear in mind that it should have a thick consistency, okay? So here I'm trying to use the glitter to map out the heel of the shoe in this shape, just to kind of let it stand out. So I'm just going to use it to map around the heel and also trace through the bottom of or trace along the bottom of the heel all the way to the front side of the heel. So once that was done, I moved on to working on the wine glass shape. So I used the same purple fine glitter mix to do a beautiful design on the wine glass shape. Here I also did a cute drip effect like I did for the lip gloss shape. I just realized I was using my hand to cover most of what I did, but I really hope you do see what I mean. So yes, I used the the same drip effect for the wine glass. So for the drip effects, as I explained earlier, you start by doing one drop and then you just map out to meet the main piece before you try and just make it look more natural or more realistic. So I only did two drips for that. Next, I used the same purple fine glitter to kind of map around the edges of the silver fine glitter on the hair dryer shape, just to also make it look more, I don't know. Honestly, I like playing around with glitter or with my resin. So just be realistic or just be creative. Okay. Make it look more beautiful, that's all. So I did have more of the purple fine glitter, so I just used it around the edges and to give it a different design. So the next thing I did was to use the same purple fine glitter on the bottom of the wine glass. So the bottom also has this very nice purple design. Yes. So next, once I was able to get it into all the corners I wanted it to sit in, I used the same glitter on the blades of the shape of the scissors. Yeah. So I used it on the blades just to kind of, for the scissors, I really didn't have an idea what I was doing. I just had more of the glitter, so I decided I'll use that instead of any other color. So once I was satisfied with the look, I used the rest of the glitters to do any corrections I had to do on any of the pieces, just to be sure I've gotten the kind of effects I wanted. At this point, it was quite late and I was feeling so sleepy, so I had to leave this to sit for another 12 hours so that I would come back later when everything was done and do the final layer, which is going to be the doming layer. After 12 hours, this had cured enough for us to do the doming. So I put on my gloves and went right into the mixing of the resin for the doming. So here I'm using the 3:1 mix ratio with the A and the B. So before you are able to dome your piece, you are going to need to mix both the A and the B. There are some people who make a mistake and think they only have to pour the hardener at this point to make it harden or to make it a domed layer, which is wrong, which is very wrong. You realize that before this resin or any of the mix ratios are going to cure or harden to form a solid plastic, they have to be mixed together. So for you to be able to get that layer of the doming layer going to be so plastic and solid, it has to be mixed with the hardener. You don't only use just resin or you don't only use just hardener. So here I'm working with a 3:1 mix ratio. I poured 30 ml of resin and I added 10 ml of hardener, making it 40 ml in all. So I did most of the mixing off camera, and once the resin was well mixed and ready to be used, I was going to move straight into pouring it on top of the resin or on top of the already existing piece to give it the doming layer. So here you realize it looks very rough, which is not the best effect for working with resin. It doesn't look shiny or glossy at all. And this is one main reason why doming is very important. It solves all these problems. Okay, so once that was well mixed, I'm just going to apply a decent quantity on the surface of the mold. So always bear in mind that whenever you are doming, it's supposed to give a circular surface. It's supposed to look round at the top. One other thing about doming is that if the surface you are working on is not very leveled or is not very straight, there's a high chance that you are going to get some spilling out of the shape you are trying to dome. And when that happens, there's still a way around that. You can either use your pipette to draw out some of the resin that is spilling over, or you can also use some mixing sticks to just tap around the edges so you're able to collect all that resin from the sides of the shape. One other reason why I always advise you try as much as possible to get rid of any excess resin on the sides of the cavities is that when it cures around the shape you are trying to create, you are now going to go through the extra step or the extra struggle or stress of trimming all those pieces after the resin has cured or after your project is ready. So with the help of the same pipettes I used to draw out the quantity of resin from the initial shapes or the previous shapes, I used the same pipette again to draw a reasonable quantity to be able to transfer it into the stem of the wine glass. So you realize here that the wine glass has a very narrow stem, which means that pouring directly from your cup is going to cause some kind of a problem because it's just going to overflow from it. I also use the same method to fill in the spaces or to dome the scissors shape because it also has some narrow sides. So you will realize that as I initially said that the pipette is also a very important tool for whenever you are working with resin art. So in times when you have narrow spaces where you cannot pour directly from your cup, you can use your pipettes in times when you want to draw out some of the resin from the cup you are working with or from the mold you are working with. You can still use the pipette. So after you squeeze on the bottom of the pipette, the resin is just going to be pulled into the pipette so that you can just transfer it onto the surface or onto the corner or space or into the mold you are trying to move the resin onto. Okay, so another name for the pipette is a dropper. So there are some people who do not call it pipettes, so you can just say a dropper or a transfer tube. So the pipette is actually the most common name for this piece here. So calling it a pipette is actually not a big deal. So once the quantity I needed was done, I just pushed out the quantity left and then proceeded to pour directly from the cup into the larger molds. Again, I used the pipettes to draw out a quantity of resin and try and transfer them into the corners that I couldn't pour directly into. So once that was all done, I used the lighter to pop all the bubbles on the surface of the project. Always remember to use your lighter to pop all the bubbles. After which I left the piece to sit for 24 hours to completely cure. So after 24 hours, they were all well cured and I was ready to demold them from the molds. I couldn't wait, so I demolded the glasses shape ahead of time and messed it up. So you can actually see on the surface that there are fingerprints and there are dents. This is what happens when you do not demold your piece at the right time. When you demold ahead of time, this is the effects you are going to get. It's going to affect the quality of the finish. So you should basically avoid doing something like this. Just leave it to sit for a full 24 hours to cure perfectly well before you proceed to demold them from the mold. So to be on the safer side, I decided to not tap the to not touch the surface while demolding the pieces. And yeah, I demolded each and every one of them and they were so cute and so pretty. I'm going to speed up the video so that we can move on to the next step of the entire project. But yeah, just take a minute to admire how pretty they all turned out to be. So here you are going to observe the three steps I explained earlier about doming. So first of all, there should be an existing piece. Secondly, that it should have a smooth finish, which we can obviously see in the video here. And then it should also have a curved surface. So if you look closely, when I am trying to turn the mold sideways for you to see the piece very well, you realize it looks curved at the top. It looks round at the top. So these three stages or these three steps define doming. Okay, so anytime you are doming a piece, it should first of all be applied on an existing surface. It should have a smooth finish with no bubbles and it should have a curved surface. So once the demolding was done, I got my eye screws, my jump rings, and my electric drill that I was going to need for the next stage, as well as my key rings. So to turn the electric drill on, I connected it to a power source and pressed the on button to toggle it on. Whenever you are making your key rings, after you have drilled the piece, the next item you put in the hole that has been drilled on the piece is what we call the eye screw. So for you to be sure of the distance or the length you're supposed to drill, you're supposed to gauge with your eye to know the length of the eye screw, and you just drill accordingly so as not to drill it too deep to make it loose in the end. So once the drilling is done, you're just going to turn the drill off, and then you're going to put in the eye screw into the hole that has already been drilled. However, on this particular project or with this particular mold, there are actually holes in it already, but I just prefer to use the eye screws. So you can see on some of them that the hole is in there, but I'm still just trying or opting to drill a hole for the eye screws and the keyring. Okay, it just depends on what you want to do. So once the eye screw has been put in, I'm going to get my key ring. So I'm going to get my jump rings, and then with the help of the pliers, I'm going to open that up, and then once that's open, I'm going to pass it through the eye of the eye screw and add my key ring to it. And with the pliers, I'm going to close that up again, and this is what we have here. This is so pretty. It's so lovely. So I repeated the same process for all of them. I drilled and added in the eye screws for every single one of them. So the eye screw is basically just going to provide the hole that we are going to put the jump ring through once we have opened it up. So once the jump ring is put through it, the next thing you're going to add is the last ring of the key ring, after which you use your second plier, or if you are very good with pliers, you can still just use one, and then you close it up and you are done. So this is what we got at the end of the project. I hope you really love them like I do. Thank you so much for watching today's tutorial. I hope you're able to recreate this, and I hope the doming process is very well explained and that you understand perfectly well how to dome a resin piece. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to share as well. If you haven't subscribed, please remember to do so. Thank you for watching this video once again. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.